You think your empathy is your strength. But what if it's not just compassion? It's a survival pattern. What if the truth is you keep giving not because you love, but because deep down you're terrified that without being needed, you'll never be loved? This is the dark truth empaths don't want to admit. It's what's quietly keeping you stuck in relationships that drain you, jobs that exploit your kindness, and a life where everyone else's needs come before your own. Today, we're going to face what you've been running from, and it might save your life. Empaths often wonder, why do I always attract people who hurt me? Why do I keep ending up in relationships where I give everything and get crumbs in return? The answer isn't that you're broken or cursed or destined for suffering. It's that something in you is trained to believe that love requires pain. That connection demands sacrifice. That your worth is measured by how much you can endure. You don't fall for the person. You fall into a pattern that was carved into your nervous system before you even knew what love was supposed to feel like. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unconscious truth shaping every choice you make in relationships. The shadow isn't the evil part of you. It's the hidden part, the part that operates below your awareness, making decisions based on old wounds and forgotten fears, drawing you toward the familiar ache of being needed rather than the unfamiliar comfort of being chosen. I've worked with hundreds of highly sensitive people who describe themselves as empaths, and what I've discovered might make you uncomfortable. But if you've ever wondered why your kindness seems to attract chaos, why your giving feels compulsive rather than chosen, why you're exhausted by your own compassion, keep listening. In this video, we'll go beneath the surface, not to shame your sensitivity, but to reclaim it from the wound it's been feeding. We'll explore how the very trait that makes you beautiful, your ability to feel deeply, became a weapon turned against yourself. Because your empathy doesn't need to disappear. Your sensitivity doesn't need to be dulled. You don't need to become cold or selfish or hard. You just need to stop using your gifts to betray yourself. Pause here and take a breath. If something in you already feels exposed, if there's a flutter of recognition or resistance, that's your shadow saying hello. Stay with me. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's 32, works in nonprofit management, and describes herself as an empath who can't turn it off. When Sarah was 7, her parents went through what they called a rough patch, but what she experienced as emotional warfare. Sarah grew up in a house where emotions were weather systems. Her father's anger would sweep through like summer storms, sudden, violent, leaving destruction in their wake. Her mother's sadness lingered like heavy fog, thick and suffocating, making it hard to see where anyone was going. And Sarah? Sarah became the meteorologist. At 8 years old, she learned to read the atmospheric pressure of her home. She knew which voice tone meant dad was about to explode. She could sense mom's depression before it fully descended, could feel it gathering like storm clouds in the way her mother's shoulders carried themselves, in the particular silence that filled the kitchen during breakfast. And most importantly, she discovered she had the power to change the weather. A perfectly timed hug when dad came home stressed. The exact right words to make mom smile. Being extra good, extra helpful, extra invisible when the air felt dangerous. Sarah learned that her emotional labor could transform the climate of her entire world. I remember feeling so powerful, Sarah told me. Like I was magic. I could make people feel better just by knowing exactly what they needed. But what Sarah didn't understand then, what none of us understand as children, is that this kind of power comes with a terrible price. It teaches you that love is conditional on your ability to manage other people's emotions. That safety depends on your usefulness. That your value is measured by how much you can absorb, fix, and heal. As a child, you were praised for being calm, kind, helpful, especially when the adults around you were emotionally volatile. You became a master of scanning for tension, fixing moods, keeping peace. Your nervous system equated being needed with being safe. Your brain learned that hypervigilance wasn't trauma, it was love. And now, as an adult, you mistake emotional labor for intimacy. You confuse being needed with being wanted. You think that if you can just love someone enough, heal them enough, sacrifice enough, they'll finally give you the security and recognition you've been craving since childhood. Think about your last relationship. How quickly did you become their emotional support system? How often did you find yourself explaining their behavior to friends, making excuses, carrying emotional weight that wasn't yours to carry? How many times did you silence your own needs because their pain seemed more urgent, more important, more deserving of attention? You attract those who subconsciously expect you to carry their pain, and you do it without question because saying no feels like abandonment. Not just abandoning them, but abandoning the role that's kept you safe your whole life. You explain away red flags because you've been trained to see them as puzzles to solve rather than warnings to heed. You feel guilty for setting boundaries because boundaries feel selfish when you've spent your entire life believing that your worth comes from your willingness to be boundaryless. You stay in relationships that drain you, not because it's love, but because walking away feels like failing at the one thing you've always been good at, helping others heal. You call it compassion. You call it love. You call it being a good person. But Jung would call it what it is, self-erasure in service of an unconscious pattern that's slowly killing you. If this part hits something in you, if you can feel the truth of it in your body, keep going. The next few minutes might feel like looking into a mirror you've been avoiding your whole life. Jung taught us that the shadow contains not just our darkness, but our disowned light. For empaths, the shadow often holds our rage, but more importantly, it holds our grief. The grief of never having been loved for who you are without effort. The grief of never being chosen for your essence, only for your function. The grief of realizing that you've spent your entire life auditioning for love that was never meant to be earned. Every time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your own truth, you're feeding the shadow. Every time you swallow your words to keep the peace, you're confirming the shadow's deepest fear, that your authentic self, the you that exists beyond helping and fixing and accommodating, isn't enough. The shadow whispers, if you stop helping, they'll leave. If you voice your needs, you'll be too much. If you set boundaries, you'll be selfish. If you ask for what you want, you'll be needy. If you take up space, you'll be a burden. And so you stay small. You stay helpful. You stay quiet about the growing ache inside that asks, when is it my turn to be held? When do I get to be the one who falls apart? When do I get to need someone without having to earn that privilege? The shadow keeps you trapped in relationships where you're constantly giving more than you're receiving, where you're always the one initiating difficult conversations, always the one doing the emotional work, always the one making excuses for why this person who claims to love you can't seem to show up for you the way you show up for them. Here's what the shadow knows that you don't want to face. You're not just attracted to wounded people because you're compassionate. You're attracted to them because their wounds make you feel valuable. Their chaos gives your life purpose. Their need for you proves that you matter. This is the dark truth that lives in the shadow. Sometimes our helping isn't about love. It's about avoiding the terror of our own worthlessness. The truth is, you're not just choosing partners or friends or even jobs. You're choosing a role, the healer, the fixer, the emotional caretaker, the one who makes everything better. And that role comes with a price. Your voice, your needs, your authentic desires, your right to be imperfect, your permission to have bad days, your ability to receive care without having to earn it first. You don't stay in painful relationships because they're good for you. You stay because you don't know who you are if you're not helping someone else heal. You've built your entire identity around being needed, and the thought of being wanted for something other than your usefulness terrifies you. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For empaths, this terror runs deeper than most people understand, because accepting yourself completely means accepting that you have needs that matter, that you have limits that deserve respect, that you're not responsible for other people's emotional weather, that your job in this life is not to sacrifice yourself on the altar of other people's healing. Let me share another story. Marcus, 29, calls himself a recovering people pleaser. He spent 5 years in a relationship where he was constantly managing his partner's anxiety, depression, and rage. I told myself I was being supportive, Marcus said. I told myself I was being patient and understanding. But the truth was, I was addicted to being needed. When she was calm and happy, I felt purposeless. When she was struggling, I felt alive. I was using her pain to feel valuable, and I was using my own emotional labor to avoid dealing with my own wounds. Marcus described the moment he realized what was happening. I was in therapy, complaining about how exhausting my relationship was, and my therapist asked me, "What would you do with your life if she didn't need you to fix her?" And I couldn't answer. I literally had no idea who I was outside of being her emotional support system. This is the shadow empaths don't want to face. Sometimes our helping isn't about love, it's about control. It's about feeling important. It's about having a clear role in a world that otherwise feels chaotic and unpredictable. Your shadow isn't your rage, though rage lives there too. Your shadow is the part of you that believes love is earned through sacrifice. The part that measures your worth by how much you can endure. The part that confuses being used with being chosen. Your shadow is the part that would rather be in a painful relationship where you're needed than risk being alone and having to face the question, who am I when I'm not saving someone? Ask yourself right now, when was the last time someone loved you without you having to earn it? When did someone choose you not because you were useful, but because you were you? When did someone see you struggling and offer support without you having to ask, the way you do for everyone else? If you can't answer that question easily, if you're drawing a blank or making excuses for why it's different, you're beginning to see the shadow. You're beginning to see how you've organized your entire life around giving love rather than receiving it. Here's the dark truth empaths don't want to admit. You've been giving to prove you're worthy of being kept. Your empathy, your sensitivity, your ability to feel everything. These are gifts. These are superpowers. These are the very qualities that make you capable of creating profound healing and connection in the world. But you've been weaponizing them against yourself. You've been using your intuition not to honor your own needs, but to anticipate and meet everyone else's before they even have to ask. You've been using your emotional intelligence not to create authentic intimacy, but to manage other people's emotions so they won't leave, so they won't get angry, so they won't withdraw their love. You've turned your greatest strengths into a survival mechanism, and it's slowly killing the parts of you that are actually worth loving. Jung called this process projection. You project onto others what you refuse to give yourself. You offer them the unconditional love, patience, and understanding that you've never offered yourself. You give them the benefit of the doubt that you never give yourself. You make space for their imperfections while demanding perfection from yourself. And then you wonder why you feel empty. You wonder why you feel resentful. You wonder why, despite being surrounded by people who need you, you feel profoundly alone. The truth is, you're alone because you've never let anyone meet the real you. You've only let them meet the helper, the fixer, the one who has it all together. You've been so busy being what everyone else needs that you've forgotten who you actually are underneath all that giving. If you've ever felt angry at yourself for caring so much, this is why. Your soul knows you're betraying it. Your authentic self is trying to get your attention, and you keep silencing it to tend to everyone else's needs. Sarah, the woman I mentioned earlier, described this moment of recognition like this. I realized I was furious. Not at him, not at anyone else, but at myself. I was angry that I'd spent 30 years being who I thought I needed to be instead of who I actually was. I was angry that I'd made myself so small, so accommodating, so endlessly available. I was angry that I treated my own needs like they were selfish, while everyone else's needs were sacred. This anger, Jung would say, is not something to be ashamed of. It's the life force that's been buried under decades of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. It's your authentic self trying to break free from the prison you've built out of other people's expectations. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Healing begins when you stop rescuing others to feel needed. It begins when you feel the familiar urge to fix someone's mood, solve their problem, absorb their anxiety, and you choose to sit in stillness instead. When you learn to stay present with your own discomfort instead of immediately reaching for someone else's pain to distract yourself from your own. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you need to be to survive. For empaths, individuation is particularly challenging because it means disappointing people. It means sitting with guilt. It means discovering that some relationships were built entirely on your willingness to be diminished. But it also means something profound. It means finding out who you are beneath the helper, beneath the fixer, beneath the one who always says yes. Sarah, the woman I mentioned earlier, describes this process like learning to breathe underwater. At first, I felt like I was drowning, she said. Every boundary felt like I was letting someone down. Every no felt like abandonment. Every time I prioritized my own needs, I felt selfish and guilty and wrong. But slowly, I realized I wasn't drowning. I was learning to swim. I was learning to move through the world without constantly scanning for who needed me to save them. I was learning to trust that I could be loved for who I am, not just for what I do. This process of individuation for empaths involves several specific stages. First, you begin to notice the pattern. You start to see how automatically you reach for others' pain, how quickly you offer solutions, how rarely you ask for what you need, how often you silence yourself to keep others comfortable. Then you begin to say no, not out of anger, but out of clarity, not to punish anyone, but to protect the tender parts of yourself that have been giving away pieces of your soul. These first boundaries feel terrifying because they go against everything you've been trained to believe about your worth. You start to feel guilt when you prioritize yourself, and instead of immediately fixing that feeling by helping someone else, you sit with it. You learn to distinguish between guilt and intuition, between the shadow's panic and your authentic knowing. Next, you begin to distinguish between different types of caring. You realize there's a difference between guilt and love, between urgency and depth, between sacrifice and actual strength. You start to see that true caring sometimes means saying no. That real love sometimes requires disappointing people. That genuine support sometimes means letting people struggle instead of rescuing them. Marcus describes this shift. I used to think that if I really love someone, I would do anything for them. Now I realize that if I really love someone, I won't do everything for them. I won't rob them of their own strength by constantly stepping in to fix things. In that space between who you used to be and who you're becoming, something beautiful happens. You begin to meet yourself. Not the self that performs. Not the self that anticipates and accommodates. Not the self that earns love through emotional labor. The self that simply is. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites until something new emerges. For empaths, this means holding the tension between caring for others and caring for yourself until you find a way to do both without self-betrayal. This is where real empathy begins. Not the compulsive kind that's driven by fear and the need to be needed, but the conscious kind that flows from wholeness and choice. You realize that true compassion includes yourself. That healthy boundaries aren't walls. They're the shores that give your love form and direction. That saying no to what drains you creates space to say yes to what nourishes you. Marcus describes this transformation. I used to think boundaries were selfish. Now I realize they're how I love people responsibly. When I'm not trying to fix them, I can actually see them. When I'm not managing their emotions, I can be present for their experience. When I'm not carrying their pain, I can witness it with true compassion. You begin to understand that you can feel someone's pain without absorbing it. You can offer support without becoming the support. You can love without losing yourself in the process. Take a moment and ask yourself, what would you do with your life if you didn't have to earn love through helping others? If you knew you were inherently worthy of care and affection, how would you spend your time? What dreams have you set aside because you've been too busy tending to everyone else's? The answer to that question is where your real life is waiting. Here's something important. The guilt you feel when you start setting boundaries isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something different. That guilt is your old programming trying to pull you back into familiar patterns. It's the shadow's last-ditch effort to keep you small and safe and needed. Sarah talked about this. When I first started saying no to things, I felt guilty for weeks. I kept thinking I was being selfish, that I was hurting people, that I was becoming cold and uncaring. But my therapist helped me understand that the guilt was information. It was showing me how deeply I'd been conditioned to believe that my worth came from my availability. The guilt wasn't telling me I was wrong. It was telling me I was changing. And change, even good change, even necessary change, feels threatening to the parts of us that have been trying to keep us safe. Learning to sit with this guilt without immediately acting to relieve it is one of the most important skills an empath can develop. It's the difference between growing and staying stuck. The guilt will try to convince you that you're being selfish. The shadow will whisper that you're becoming just like the people who hurt you. Your old patterns will scream that if you don't help, something terrible will happen. But here's what you'll discover if you stay the course. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. The relationships that are meant for you will improve when you stop managing them. And the ones that fall away were never really yours to begin with. You were never too much. You were just given to people who couldn't receive you. Your softness was never the problem. Your forgetting was. Forgetting that love, real love, doesn't ask you to vanish. It meets you in your fullness. It celebrates your sensitivity without exploiting it. It receives your care without demanding your sacrifice. Real love doesn't need you to be perfect. It doesn't need you to have all the answers. It doesn't need you to fix or heal or save anyone. Real love wants to know what you're afraid of, what you dream about, what makes you laugh until your stomach hurts, what you think about when you're alone with your thoughts. You're not here to be a sponge for someone else's chaos. You're not here to prove your worth through endurance. You're not here to love people back to life while you slowly fade away. You're here to remember your wholeness and live from it. The moment you stop offering yourself as a mirror for others' wounds, something miraculous happens. You become the flame. And only those who carry fire within themselves will dare to come close. This doesn't mean you become cold or uncaring. It doesn't mean you stop being sensitive or empathetic. It means you care consciously, intentionally, without losing yourself in the process. You learn to feel someone's pain without absorbing it. You learn to offer support without becoming the sole source of support. You learn to love without becoming a victim of your own loving. Sarah tells me that her relationships now feel completely different. I used to attract people who needed fixing, she says. Drama-filled, emotionally unavailable people who saw my empathy as an invitation to dump their unprocessed trauma on me. Now I attract people who see me, who are curious about my inner world, who want to know what I need, not just what I can provide. It's terrifying and beautiful at the same time. I'm learning what it feels like to be chosen rather than needed. I'm learning what it's like to be loved for who I am, not what I do. Marcus echoes this transformation. The people in my life now aren't there because I'm useful. They're there because they enjoy my company. They laugh at my jokes. They're interested in my thoughts and opinions. I never knew that was possible. I thought love had to be earned through suffering. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Your sensitivity isn't a burden you need to manage. It's not a weakness you need to compensate for with endless giving. It's not a flaw that makes you vulnerable to being taken advantage of. Your sensitivity is intelligence. It's a way of knowing the world that goes deeper than logic, beyond surface appearances, into the heart of what's real and true. But that intelligence was hijacked by trauma. It was enlisted in service of survival rather than thriving. Your empathy became a strategy instead of a gift. Your intuition became a tool for managing others instead of guiding yourself. Your real work isn't to become less sensitive. The world needs your sensitivity. The world needs people who can feel deeply, who can see beneath the surface, who can hold space for complex emotions and difficult truths. Your real work is to reclaim your sensitivity from the fear that's been driving it, to use your empathy consciously rather than compulsively, to direct your care toward those who can receive it rather than those who can only consume it. Your real work isn't to stop caring. It's to learn to care without betraying yourself, to love without abandoning yourself, to give without emptying yourself. Your real work isn't to build walls around your heart. It's to build discernment, the ability to sense not just what someone needs, but whether you're the one meant to provide it. Whether this is your pain to carry or your lesson to learn. Jung taught us that the goal of psychological development isn't to eliminate suffering, but to transform our relationship to it. For empaths, this means learning to be with pain, yours and others, without immediately rushing to fix it. It means developing what Jung called the capacity to contain, the ability to hold difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them, the ability to witness suffering without becoming it. If this video has stirred something in you, if you can feel the truth of these words in your body, take a moment to honor that. Change begins with recognition. Growth starts with seeing. And healing happens when we stop running from the parts of ourselves we've been afraid to face. If this has been helpful, I'd love for you to like this video so others who need this message can find it. You don't need to be needed to be real. You just need to belong to yourself. When you belong to yourself, everything changes. Your empathy becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. Your care becomes conscious rather than reactive. Your love becomes sustainable rather than self-destructive. You start to notice the difference between people who want to know you and people who want to use you, between those who are curious about your inner world and those who only care about what you can provide. The people who are meant for you will love you not because you fix them, but because you inspire them to fix themselves. Not because you carry their weight, but because you show them how to stand. Not because you rescue them from their pain, but because you trust them to find their own strength. You'll find yourself drawn to people who can match your depth without requiring you to manage their emotions, who can appreciate your sensitivity without exploiting it, who see your empathy as a gift to be honored, not a resource to be consumed. This is the path Jung called individuation. This is what it means to integrate your shadow. This is how empaths heal, by learning to extend to themselves the same unconditional love they've been giving away to everyone else. Your journey isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. But now you're traveling with your whole self, not just the parts that others find useful. You're learning to listen to your own voice with the same attention you've always given to others' voices. You're learning to hold space for your own emotions with the same compassion you've always shown others' feelings. You're discovering that you can be sensitive without being a victim, empathetic without being a target, caring without being consumed. The world needs empaths who have done this work, who have learned to love from wholeness rather than woundedness, who can offer support without sacrificing themselves, who can feel deeply without drowning. Take a breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice the space around you, the air you're breathing, the life that's flowing through you right now. You made it through this video. You made it through these revelations. You made it through the recognition that might have felt uncomfortable or challenging. And more importantly, you made it through as yourself. Not the version of yourself that manages everyone else's emotions. Not the version that earns love through endless giving. The version that simply is. The version that's worthy of love without having to prove it. The version that can care for others without abandoning yourself. Welcome home. If you're ready to dive deeper into Jung's teachings and how they apply to highly sensitive people, subscribe for more content like this. And remember, you don't have to do this work alone. Sometimes the most empathic thing you can do is ask for support. In the comments, I'd love to hear, what's one boundary you're ready to set after watching this? What's one way you want to start caring for yourself the way you care for others? Your healing matters. Your wholeness matters. You matter, not for what you do, but for who you are.